Rain poured endlessly that night, drenching the small wooden porch where Daniel, a weary single father, sat with his little son asleep in his arms. Life had not been kind to him. Ever since his wife passed away, every day felt like an uphill battle. His modest home bore the marks of struggle, but it was filled with love. When the knock came at the door, sharp and unexpected, Daniel hesitated before opening it, only to find a trembling young woman, soaked to the bone, her eyes pleading silently for shelter. She didn't say much at first, only that she had nowhere to go for the night. Daniel's instincts warned him to be cautious. He had a child to protect. But something in her eyes, a mix of fear and vulnerability, softened him. Without overthinking, he stepped aside and let her in. He didn't know her name, didn't know her story, but he knew what loneliness felt like, and he couldn't bring himself to turn her away. As the small fireplace flickered to life, the girl's shivering began to calm. Daniel offered her one of his late wife's old sweaters and some tea made from the few leaves he had left. His son, curious, peeked from the blanket and asked innocently, "Daddy, is she an angel?" The girl's lips curved into the faintest smile, though sadness still lingered in her eyes. She whispered softly, "Not an angel, just lost." The hours stretched into quiet moments filled with small talk. She revealed her name was Isabella but gave little else away. Daniel, respectful of her silence, didn't pry. Instead, he told her stories of his son, how strong he was despite his young age, how they made the best of their simple life. Isabella listened intently, her heart tightening as she saw the depth of love in this struggling man's words. When Daniel excused himself to tuck his boy into bed, Isabella wandered around the tiny home, her eyes catching on the worn furniture, the patched curtains, the shelf filled with old books and toys. It was clear life here wasn't easy, yet every corner carried warmth. For the first time in years, she felt something she couldn't explain, a sense of belonging she had never known in her gilded, distant world. As the night deepened, Daniel returned, sitting across from her with a tired smile. He admitted, almost embarrassed, that money was tight and life was hard, but he was doing his best for his boy. He expected pity in her gaze, but instead, he saw admiration. Isabella's heart stirred. This man, with nothing but hardship around him, had more strength and dignity than all the wealthy faces she had left behind. Finally, unable to contain it, Isabella revealed a piece of her truth. She wasn't just a lost girl in the rain, she was the daughter of one of the richest men in the city. She had left her world behind, running from the suffocating control of a father who never saw her as a person, only an asset. She expected Daniel to recoil, to treat her differently now, but instead he chuckled softly and said, "Or rich or poor, everyone needs a place to rest." Those words struck her deeper than she could show. No one had ever spoken to her like that, not as an heir, not as a pawn, but as a human being. She looked at Daniel then, not just as the man who opened his door, but as someone who unknowingly opened a door in her heart. By the time the first light of dawn broke, Isabella knew her life would never be the same. The simple kindness she had received in that tiny house outweighed all the luxuries of her past. Daniel didn't yet realize who had stepped into his home, nor how his life was about to change, but fate had quietly shifted the moment he chose compassion over suspicion. As Isabella prepared to leave that morning, Daniel's son clung to her hand, asking if she would come back. She promised she would, though she wasn't sure how. Watching her walk away, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that her arrival was no accident. And somewhere deep inside, Isabella knew she hadn't just found shelter from the storm. She had found a place her heart longed to call home. As Isabella walked back into the world she had abandoned, her steps slowed with every mile, her heart torn between duty and longing. The echo of Daniel's small house lingered in her mind, not because of the roof or the walls, but because of the love it held. For the first time in her life, she had tasted what it meant to be seen as a person rather than a daughter of fortune, and that taste haunted her in ways she could not explain. Her return home was met with the cold, unyielding presence of her father. A man of immense wealth and power, he demanded explanations, but Isabella remained silent. To him, her silence was rebellion. To her, it was survival. That night, as she lay in her room surrounded by silks and gold, all she could think of was the sound of rain on Daniel's roof and the warmth of his son's tiny hand in hers. Meanwhile, Daniel tried to dismiss the feeling that something greater was at play. Life demanded his attention, bills need, Ed paying. Meals had to be stretched, and his son needed shoes for school. But every time he passed the corner where Isabella had sat in his wife's old sweater, his heart tightened. He told himself not to think of her. She belonged to another world, surely. Yet deep down, he knew her presence had planted something in his soul. Days passed, and Isabella found herself sneaking away whenever she could. Her father thought she was spending time at art lessons or charitable causes, but instead she would walk through the old part of town, her heart leading her back to Daniel's porch. Each visit brought her closer to him and his boy, each conversation peeling away the walls around her heart. She laughed more in that small house than she had in her entire childhood mansion. Daniel remained wary. He didn't know why a girl like Isabella would want to spend her evenings in a poor man's home when she clearly had the grace of someone from another life. He asked her once, quietly, "What are you running from?" She smiled faintly and answered, "I'm not running, Daniel. Searching." He didn't press further, though the answer lingered with him. It wasn't long before whispers spread in Isabella's world. Her father's men grew suspicious, following her steps until one night they trailed her straight to Daniel's house. The sight of their daughter sitting at a poor man's table, laughing with his son, was a scandal in his eyes. To him, it was betrayal. To Isabella, it was salvation. That confrontation was coming, but she wasn't ready to face it yet. One evening, Isabella arrived to find Daniel sitting with his head in his hands. His son had fallen ill, and the medicines were far beyond what Daniel could afford. Fear etched his features as he confessed, "Son, I don't know how to save him this time." Without hesitation, Isabella promised she would take care of it. That night, she returned home and used her father's resources under the guise of a donation to ensure the boy had the treatment he needed. Daniel was stunned. He had no idea how Isabella had managed it, but his son's recovery felt like a miracle. He thanked her, though she waved it off, whispering, "Oh, no child should suffer for what the world withholds." In that moment, he looked at her differently, not just as a stranger who had knocked on his door, but as someone who was changing his world. The bond between them grew deeper, though unspoken. Isabella helped where she could, blending into their lives as though she had always belonged. Daniel's boy adored her, calling her his angel, and Daniel himself found his heart betraying the vows he had whispered to his late wife. He didn't know if it was right to feel this way again, but he couldn't deny the spark that Isabella carried into his home. The storm finally broke one night when Isabella's father arrived at Daniel's door with his entourage. His fury filled the tiny room as he declared, "You have no idea who she is, or what you've stolen from me." Daniel stood, protective, though confused as the truth spilled out. Isabella wasn't a lost girl at all, but the heir to one of the greatest fortunes in the state. Silence hung heavy as Daniel's world spun, and Isabella's eyes brimmed with tears. Daniel's heart clenched. The pieces fell together. Her grace, her secrecy, her sudden ability to help his son. He felt betrayed, though he couldn't deny the sincerity in her eyes. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked softly, his voice breaking. Isabella stepped closer, her hands trembling as she said, "Because I wanted you to see me, not my name, not my father's wealth. Just me." Her father sneered, insisting she leave immediately, calling Daniel unworthy, nothing more than a charity case. But Isabella stood her ground, her voice shaking yet firm. "See a poor man, father. I see the strongest soul I've ever met, and I won't walk away." The room crackled with tension. Daniel torn between stepping back and stepping forward, but Isabella's defiance gave him strength he didn't know he had. Her father threatened to cut her off, to strip her of the fortune she was born into. Isabella didn't flinch. For the first time in her life, she spoke with complete certainty. "And then take it all. I would rather be poor and free with love than rich and chained without it." Daniel's chest tightened as her words filled the room, and for the first time he truly saw the depth of her courage. When the storm of anger faded and her father finally left, Daniel sat in stunned silence. He hadn't asked for this, hadn't dared to dream that someone like her could choose someone like him. Yet here she was, standing in his humble kitchen, stripped of her wealth but shining brighter than ever. His son tugged at his sleeve and whispered, "Daddy, can she stay forever?" Daniel looked at Isabella, really looked at her, and saw not the daughter of a millionaire but the woman who had chosen kindness over comfort, love over luxury. His voice shook as he answered his boy, "If he wants to." Isabella's tears fell freely as she nodded, her heart finally finding the home it had always been searching for. In the weeks that followed, Isabella kept her promise. She turned her back on the life of wealth and embraced the simplicity of Daniel's world. The villagers whispered, some in disbelief, others in awe, but Isabella didn't care. She found joy in small things, helping Daniel cook, teaching his son, planting flowers outside the little house. For her, this was freedom. Daniel, though hesitant at first, allowed his heart to heal. Slowly, he accepted that loving again didn't mean betraying his late wife. Isabella's love didn't replace what he had lost. It honored it, added to it, gave it new life. His son, brighter and healthier, thrived under the warmth of a family that finally felt complete. But life wasn't without challenges. Without her father's wealth, Isabella struggled with the harsh realities of poverty. Yet every time doubt crept in, Daniel's steady presence reminded her she had chosen rightly. "Oh, make it through," he would say, and somehow they always did. The strength of their bond grew not from what they had, but from what they endured together. One evening, as they sat under the stars, Daniel confessed that he had feared her leaving every day since she arrived. Isabella smiled softly, resting her head against his shoulder, and whispered, "I've never been more certain of where I belong." In that moment, the world's noise fell away, and only the quiet truth of their love remained. The story of the millionaire's daughter who chose a poor single father became a legend whispered in the town. But for Daniel and Isabella, it wasn't a tale of scandal or sacrifice. It was simply their life. A life built on love, resilience, and the choice to see beyond wealth or struggle. In the end, Isabella hadn't just found shelter for a night. She had found forever in the heart of the man who once thought he had nothing left to give.